In this episode of the Sam Oldham podcast, we're going to be doing a Q&A session. So this week, we've reached 5 months of recording podcasts. Last week, we recorded episode 20. Today's 21. So I wanted to mark that occasion and answer some of the listeners' questions. So we're going to get straight into it. First one I've got is from Nuno, and it is how to rehab a shoulder cuff tear. So I'm guessing he's got a shoulder cuff tear. And this is one that I've done many, many times. I think where I'd start with is probably what I'd learned towards the end of my career. And I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but the first thing I would do if I had a tear in my shoulder cuff right now would be to get pain-free doing all of like my everyday life things. So whether that would be sleeping, being able to put a seatbelt on, picking things up, you know, if I had any pain doing that stuff, I wouldn't be trying to do any rehab. I'd be waiting until that pain had gone away. The first thing I would then do, if I started to do a little bit of rehab, would be working on that capacity stuff. So even when I tore my cuff in that final competition at the British Championships in 2021, and I went over to the physio, I said, "Can you check my cuff?" He had a little test of it, said, "Yeah, there's no strength in there. I think you've damaged your cuff." The first thing he got me to do was to do some capacity work. And that's because the muscles in the back of your shoulder, the stabilizing muscles, they really like lots of work. They like capacity work. So they want to do loads of repetitions with like not a lot of resistance, especially if it's weak, and you have a tear in your shoulder cuff. So I would start with that. I use like a yellow band. I still use that now. So when I was in the gym yesterday lifting weights, I used a yellow band, and it's all those elastic exercises that you see athletes doing all of the time. There's loads of different ones, and it's all about setting your shoulders back and switching on those stabilizing muscles at the back. If you are a gymnast, Nuno, which I'm guessing you are, you're probably very front muscle dominant. So if you see me sitting here, just naturally, you can see how my shoulders are sitting forward. It's because when you do gymnastics, like the majority of the time, you're using your chest, your shoulders, your biceps, and it's all of these muscles at the front. But we don't really work on those stabilizers at the back, and they're the muscles that help you set your shoulders back and sit in line. Because I always think of your shoulder a bit like the shoulder joint is like almost having like a stool, like a bar stool with loads of different legs, and you've got all these ligaments and different tendons coming off the legs. But if you spun the chair around, they'd all tangle up. That's a bit like your shoulder. So because my shoulders sit forward like this, instead of sitting nice and flush in the joint, my shoulder kind of sits like that a lot of the time, and I get all sorts of problems in my shoulder. So it's all about setting yourself up and trying to have like correct posture. So that's what I'd do in the beginning. I'd do loads of those capacity exercises. Once you're getting up to like 30, 40, 50 repetitions with that yellow band, and it's quite easy and you've got no pain, then you could maybe add in like a stronger band, like a red band or a blue band, and make it a little bit harder that way. But yeah, those exercises are going to be really good. And if you have had a tear in your cuff, I'd recommend doing those exercises anyway, just once a week, just to activate your shoulders, because it would then, instead of being rehab, it would be prehab. So that's the goal, right? Is to do stuff that is to do exercises and to do rehabilitation type exercises that's going to prevent an injury in the first place. So that's what I would recommend. And then once you've done that, I'd move on to stability. Because again, if you are a gymnast, the things that are going to be really difficult for you are rings. When you're holding strength positions and the rings are moving, that's so difficult for the shoulder joint. So I'd be doing stuff like on a medicine ball, like being in a plank on 2 arms, or being in a plank on 2 arms straight or bent, taking 1 arm off, being able to do that and really set those stabilizing muscles and make sure your shoulder's nice and strong, especially for things like P-bars as well. If you're doing really technical skills on P-bars, there's so much stress and pressure going through your shoulder. So that stability work is really, really important. And then once you've kind of got those 2 things locked down, and you've got the capacity work and the shoulder activation work, and then you've got that stability work together, then I'd start like building strength. And what I've found that's been really interesting since I came back from traveling and I've been going to the gym and I'm trying to get a bit stronger and put on some muscle mass, is that shoulder and that cuff actually really likes that work. And I guess it's a bit like doing that capacity work, and that's what I have been doing. I've been doing like 10 sets of 10 sometimes. And, initially I thought, my shoulder's not going to like this. It's not going to like lifting the weight, but it actually really likes that repetition. So, that's what I'd do. I'd think capacity, stability, and then strength. And then, first thing is to make sure that you're pain-free, just living your everyday life. Get that out of the way. You can work on those 3 things, and then you should be able to get back to full training. But also, it depends on how bad that shoulder cuff tear is. For me, I don't think they were full tears. I know that people do end up having surgery on their shoulders and stuff. That shoulder still does bother me. So even now when I lift weights and stuff, it's not quite 100%, but I don't think it ever will be because I just did too much damage to it over the years. But you can definitely rehab it and get back to full gymnastics for sure. So that's the answer to that one. Good question. Next question. How to build mental resilience. And that's by Mardi or Maddie. So apologies if I pronounced your name wrong. I think with that one, it's really hard to almost artificially create situations that are going to build resilience. But I think the answer is probably the right amount of stress. Too much stress is probably going to be more trauma and it's going to lead to more mental issues than it is going to be building mental resilience. Like when I think about the great times when things were going right and I was getting really good competition results, and that was, competition after competition for a space of 6 months. I don't think they're really the times that I built up mental resilience. I think it was more the times that I was injured and I had to came back, or I faced a setback. And I think ultimately it's pushing yourself outside your comfort zone at times, but it's knowing the right time to do that. I certainly took that way too far and made my life very difficult for myself at times. And I think, life is just difficult. So building like mental resilience is really important because it doesn't matter whether you're an athlete or whatever you do. Like life is tough. You're going to get setbacks and challenges. And the only way to really build that resilience is by going through them and experiencing them and facing them head on. And each time you kind of build another layer of armor, or you kind of arm yourself with more weapons to deal with the next challenge. So I think it's facing the right amount of stress, not too much stress, because you don't want it to break you. Ultimately I got to a point in my life when I was like 25 where I'd just taken too much stress on over such a long period of time that it just completely broke me. Whereas I'm at a point now where, slowly over time, I've had the right amount of stress and I've had time in between to kind of figure things out, that now when a problem arises, I'm able to kind of look at it. I might have been through a similar problem in the past and I can think, right, how am I best to get through this? That's what I would probably answer to that question. I think there was like an added bit onto it. I think the other thing was like, how do you approach like fear and mental blocks as well as part of that and building that resilience? And that's one that I've talked about on the episodes before. And, my idea, that theory I had about mental blocks and being able to like break the skill back down to the parts that you need to focus on and not worrying about what could go wrong. Instead of focusing on that outcome, you're focusing on the process. But I think accepting like how you're feeling in those situations is really important, because if you're doing a new gymnastics skill for the first time, or you've injured yourself doing a skill and you're trying it again for the first time, or there's a apparatus or something that you're a bit scared of, or you've got to go out and do a competition, that fear, those nerves, they're completely normal. You're supposed to feel that. And that never really goes away, I don't think. Like, I don't think it would matter if you'd competed at 5 Olympic Games. You're still going to be nervous walking out for that 5th Olympic Games. It's more that you understand what those feelings are and you appreciate that they're just normal. And because you've experienced those enough times, you can kind of sit with them. And for me, I know that, most of the time, even coming today and recording this podcast, like every morning that I record a podcast, although I've now done it 20 times and I thoroughly plan each episode, I know exactly what I'm going to say, I still get a little bit of nerves. I still get a bit nervous, but I don't let that stop me from walking out the door in the morning to drive to the studio to record the podcast, because I know that that's just part of the process. And every time that I get out of the door and I go and record an episode, that's like almost, it's like I've heard someone put it like this before, it's almost like a vote that, yeah, I can do this. It's every time I do that, I give myself a bit more self-confidence that I can overcome that hurdle of feeling a bit nervous and a bit scared. And every time that I do record an episode, I walk out and go, it wasn't that bad. And I feel nice and relaxed, and I forget about recording the next episode till the next week. And then I get those nerves again. It comes back. So I think it's just being able to sit with those feelings, understanding that they're normal, and then being able to use your rational brain, your logical brain logical brain and making good decisions. Because normally if you're scared of something or you're nervous, you're probably quite emotional. And especially when you're doing gymnastics, if it is a gymnastics related question, you need to be able to use your brain. You need to be really smart. You want to be the smart athlete that can switch it on in those high pressured situations. So if it's going out to compete, you don't want to be reacting to emotion. If you're about to put your hand up to do a high bar routine, you want to be nice and calm and focusing again on that process and not the outcome. So yeah, I think that's really important, and hopefully it answers your question a little bit. Next one. This is a really cool one actually, but quite sad as well. It was from Julius, and it's how to train without a coach. And he sent me this message. He says he's really enjoying the podcast, and sadly his coach passed away in a car accident a couple of years ago, and then the coach that he had after that has moved away, so he actually trains by himself, which I've got to say, that's amazing. And I actually clicked on his Instagram profile and watched some of his gymnastics, and he's really good. So well done, mate. That's amazing to be able to train without a coach. I don't think I could have ever done that. And yeah, so it really got my brain working and thinking what would I do if I was to train without a coach? How would I do that? Especially he didn't look very old, so I don't think he's in his 20s yet. It's probably a teenager. And that's a hard question, but what I would do if I was going to do that, I would sit down and think about all the jobs that a coach does for you and what they might be. If I sit down and I think about, right, what did Sergey do for me? The first thing he would do would be, it'd be a massive motivator, right? So on the days that I was struggling, he'd be someone that would get me up. Come on, Sam, you've got to go. He would set my program for me. He'd be the person that supported me for new skills if I was trying new things. He was the guy that had the access to all of that knowledge that I needed to teach me how to learn these new skills, because I'd never learned them before. So I would really think about what would a coach do and how can I replicate that without one? And so straight away I'd think, right, I'm going to have to make sure that I've got really good teammates, because it was really important for me that Sergey, he knew me, he knew my body, he knew my psyche, he knew what I was like emotionally, mentally, the type of athlete I was. So if I walked into the gym one day and I wasn't quite feeling myself, he knew that straight away. So he could adapt my training sessions. If he could see that I was physically a bit more tired, he would change the program. If I went in and I had to do 2 routines and I was completely exhausted and I mentally wasn't quite with it, he would maybe adapt the session and say, look, Sam, you're just going to do 1 routine and 1 of each half, or just 1 routine. But I had to rely on him for that, because I would have just gone and tried to force myself to do the 2 routines and potentially end up, hurting myself or picking up a little injury. So I'd have to rely on my teammates a lot. So that's what I would suggest that you do. Make sure you build a real close relationship with the guys in your group. Make sure that you're telling them how you're feeling if you're tired on certain days, or tell them today I'm feeling really good, and ask them what they think to your gymnastics. That's really important, because we all need people around us. If I was just left in the gym on my own with nobody else to kind of bounce off or to get ideas from, or to say, can you watch? I used to do that with my teammates all the time. Can you watch this? Tell me what you think. That's really important. So that feedback and that knowledge, you're definitely going to need that. So rely on the guys in your group, build close relationships with them, ask them questions about your gymnastics, ask them to watch it, ask them what they think. Also do it yourself, so you have a better appreciation of looking at someone else's gymnastics and thinking of it as, because you're emotionally attached from their gymnastics, you can think of it more as being a coach. So you can think about, what would a coach maybe say to me? How would they put that differently to me in the way that I'm explaining it to myself? That would be really important. I'd watch loads and loads of footage. The beauty of today's, I guess, the time that we live in right now is that there's so much gymnastics on the internet. You could literally type in nearly every skill and you could find those skills. So really make use of that. The other thing I would do, and this will probably be, you might be a bit nervous to do this, but if I had no coach and I was in my mid-teens, I would literally, if I had a question about gymnastics, I'd just bombard every well-known gymnast that I could, because I'd think one of them's going to answer me back. One of them's going to give me some good advice. So I'd do that, and I'd seek out mentors. And I think the most important thing is that making sure that you're not, if you're really struggling on your own, you should think about trying to find a coach. Maybe thinking about looking at a different gym, because Yeah, it's really hard. It sounds like you're really invested in gymnastics. You want it to be a career. I don't know whether, I kind of looked at your video and it seemed like you potentially compete for a Bundesliga team. So, you know, I do say to people, a coach doesn't necessarily need to be somebody with really high expertise. You know, I would take a coach every single day of the week that is hugely committed, is massively passionate. They want to learn. They're motivated. They're going to come and put the work in. Like, I would take a coach with all of those qualities over a coach that maybe didn't possess all of them, but had, you know, huge technical knowledge, like, all of the time, because you can learn the technical stuff. And that's why, like, so much in sport, it's like a common phrase. It's quite well known that the best athletes don't always make the best coaches, right? And it's because, like, a lot of the time, a lot of the best athletes are incredibly talented and they pick things up really fast and they've never had to really go through some of those barriers to figure it out themselves. So, yeah, that's what I would recommend doing, is try and seek out mentors. If you can't get a coach, are there people that are around you or around you in the gym or older gymnasts that you can seek out for advice? So hopefully that's kind of answered your question a little bit there, mate. I mean, that's a really difficult situation. I'm really sorry that, you know, your coach passed away. God, if that had happened to Sergey, I would have really struggled. I don't know what I would have done, but I know that for me, like, the most important thing is the knowledge in the room. So you can watch as many videos as you like, but if you're in that gym on your own and you're super isolated, it's going to be really tough. You need that knowledge, you need that experience, you need those expertise. So you've got to go out into the world and find them, whether it's trying to talk to athletes online or whether it's watching YouTube videos, documentaries, whatever that is. You need that knowledge, and massively analyze your gymnastics, you know, like, record it, watch it back, because I would get that instant feedback from Sergey and I would trust his knowledge to be able to tell me, Sam, that wasn't quite right. You need to change that. You need to adjust that a little bit. If you're not getting that feedback from a coach, you need to be getting that from your training partners or watching yourself, like, recording most of your training sessions and watching it back. So that would be my advice, but that's a really hard question to answer. And yeah, if you ever need any advice, mate, you're always welcome to send me a message. So hopefully that helps, Julius. Right, next question. Do you plan to do gymnastics again? And that's by Jake Barry. You know, I recorded that episode recently of what if I made a comeback, what would that look like? And, you know, since then I went to the gym that one time. I really just don't have that fire within me to get in the gym and start working towards anything. I think if I was going to come back, there's only a few things I would do it for. It'd have to be the right opportunity. It'd have to really inspire me. I think the only things I would come back to do gymnastics for would be if there was like a big, massive competition like the Superstars of Gymnastics that I did in 2019, where we got a big group of awesome athletes together and they said it was almost like a show more than a competition. That would be cool. Like, I wouldn't want to compete in traditional gymnastics competitions again. I have no desire to, like, win medals or do anything like that. I think some of the skills a skill that would get me back to gymnastics, I thought about this for a while. I tried it when I was about 20 years old as a Brett Schneider, which is a Kovac with 2 twists, so a double twist in Kovac. Never caught it. Don't think a GB gymnast has ever caught that. So that's one thing I have thought about in my head, but the physical preparation I would have to do to be able to get to the point where I'd be able to safely train that, or just start training that, kind of fills me with a bit of dread, because that's a lot of work to get up to that stage, because a skill like that is one of the hardest skills in gymnastics. So it would have to be something like that, maybe a strength skill. I'd be quite interested to see, like, I'm nearly at the point now where I've put on a stone of muscle since the start of the year, so I'd be interested to see how that would translate to gymnastics bodyweight strength on rings. But again, I still have that cuff problem, and you know, now I'm fine doing everything in my everyday life and lifting weights. I'd be quite cautious of messing that up. I don't really want to do that. So it'd have to be something like that. But I think the way in which I'd get involved in gymnastics in the future is probably helping other gymnasts, mentoring, coaching. And I've got ideas for different types of gymnastics competitions, you know, a cool concept, something a bit different, you know. I did a competition called the Pro Gymnastics Challenge when I was 20 years old out in America. something like that, something cool, bringing something new to gymnastics, because I think it does need that. You know, I think people love the sport, and every time it's on the Olympics or every time it's on TV for the World Championships, European Championships, you see people talking about it. I walk through the gym in David Lloyd and it's on TV and everyone's captivated by it. So I think there's something there. It just needs to be packaged in the right way. So I think that would be what would get me back to gymnastics. It'd be something like that. But at the moment, I have no real desire to get back in the gym and do any gymnastics. I'm enjoying playing football at the minute. I'm enjoying going to the gym. I want to start doing a bit of mixed martial arts. You know, I tried a one-to-one session of that and really enjoyed it. That's something I think would be a really cool way to like keep fit and stay healthy. To do that once a week. So, yeah, gymnastics just isn't pulling me back at the moment. But yeah, thanks for the question, man. Next question. Okay, this was an interesting question. This is by, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name, mate. It's either Laki or Lachi Ferreto. And the first one, it was like a two-part question. The first one was, what would be your mindset for somebody that is doing well and has ambitions to, compete at a high level, but is just not quite making it onto the team or just not quite getting the results? And I'd probably describe that as almost being like a bit of a dark horse. And I think, for me, the first thing is, and I say this all the time, you got to run your own race, okay? And it's a marathon, it isn't a sprint. So you need to think about your gymnastics career rather than, I know that's hard when you're young, because I was exactly like you would be. I'd want everything right then. If you try and think of your gymnastics career as like a 20-year career, you don't want to get your best results and peak when you're 17. You want to do that, towards the middle and the end of your career. That's when you want to do it. And I would really, really focus on just running your own race, working out what your strengths are. I've spoke about that before in the mentoring podcast. Think about your super strengths. What are they? How do I focus on them? Really concentrate on learning the art of competing. So when you go to competitions, be curious. How do I feel? Am I nervous? When you do a good performance, okay, what did I do then? How was I feeling? What was my approach to that? How much training did I do beforehand? Like if you have a bad performance, okay, was there anything I did differently there? How could I adjust that? Just be really, really curious. Not in a way that you analyze yourself and you kind of beat yourself up if you have a bad competition, but in a really just a curious way. Because like at this point, I'm guessing that you're still a young gymnast. You just need to learn as much as possible. Because the problem was for me that, when my body was young and fresh, my mind, my experience, my knowledge, my maturity just wasn't there. And your aim, I think, as an athlete, is to get to a point where your body and your mind kind of align at just the right time, at the same time. My mind kind of got there when my body had almost started going downhill. It was too late. I had like peaked already physically, and then things started to deteriorate and I was getting a lot more injuries. I didn't quite have the power that I used to have. I didn't have the strength, but my experience, my maturity, my ability to make logical decisions and not use my emotions, that started really, really gearing up and getting much better and better towards the end of my career, but I was already physically on the decline. So I think your goal is to try and get them to align at the right time. So what I'd say is, while you're now physically in good shape, learn as much gymnastics as possible. I always say this to people, like, you learn the majority of your gymnastics by the time you're 18. And it's true, if you think about it, like, once you're past 18, you're only really ever adding on a twist or a somersault or a skill that you've already done that is a bit like another skill. The majority of your skills are kind of done, so you have to learn almost everything. One thing that Sergey did with me that was absolutely amazing was he taught me so many different gymnastic skills on every apparatus that by the time I was 18, 19, 20, whenever the code of points changed every 4 years, it wasn't a problem for me because I'd already done, when I was a kid, a lot of the different skills. So I just had to start practicing them more regularly and pick up those patterns again, that they normally came really fast for me. So when you're younger, learn as much gymnastics as possible, make loads of mistakes, and just be really curious. And then your goal is to have a nice, successful, long career and make sure that your body and your mind align at just the right time. I would have much rather had a really good senior career and, been fresh, physically capable, and ready to perform at the age of 21 up until 28, rather than the age of like 17 up until 21, 22, which is what happened for me. In many ways, like, I peaked too early, and by the time I'd physically peaked and I started going downhill, it took me another 2 or 3 years for like my brain and all of that to kind of catch up. So I would definitely say that. And I wrote down a few more notes for that one. So, the next thing that I would do, if you're trying to aim to, let's say, get on a team or get some better results, you got to surround yourself with the people that are a level up. That's really important in life. Like, again, I've just answered somebody else's question and said it's access to the knowledge. It's the knowledge in the room. If you want to get to the next level, you've got to try and surround yourself with those people. So if you go to a competition and you're competing with different clubs, the best kids in your age group, talk to them, have a conversation with them, become friends with them, watch the gymnastics, see what they're doing. Are they warming up different to the way I'm warming up? Are they doing different skills to the way I am? Are they acting in a different way to the way that I'm acting? Like, watch all of that stuff. It's really important. And that's one thing I did really well throughout my career when I was younger, particularly. I would always try to find the person that was one above me or the next level up. And I'd train with them. I'd learn what they do. What do they do differently? What are they good at? How can I get as good as them? How can I do the same type of training they're doing and then do a little bit more? If they were doing 10 reps, I'll do 11. I figured that out pretty quickly, and it really helped me in many ways, particularly when I was younger and I came onto that senior team. I improved really quickly because of that. Surround yourself with people that are a level up. And I wrote one more thing down. And then the same thing, like I come back to, you got to try, and your goal is to make sure that your brain and your body align just at the right time, Hopefully that answered your question to part one. And there was another question, which again was a really cool one. And it was, what would be your approach to competing on the pommel horse? So this is really good. And it's something that I got wrong and I got right throughout my career. It was probably a 50-50 mix. Particularly when I was younger, pommel horse was always the most difficult apparatus for me. It was like common knowledge when I was, under the age of maybe 14 that I would normally fall off on pommel horse. And it was just a question of how many times I would fall off would determine where I ended up finishing, like in the placings. And as I got to 14, 15, I started to get much better, and I started doing a lot of work on pommel horse, and my skill development improved pretty quickly. And with pommel horse, it's really important that I think that you do a lot of numbers. So I used to do way more pommel routines than I ever did on any other apparatus, just because it's so hard to compete on pommel horse, but also it's not as physically taxing on your body. You're not putting as much pressure on your joints as you are. It's not as much impact work as it is floor, vault, high bar, rings. So pommel horse for sure is one apparatus where you can do a lot more. But I think that approach and going into a pommel horse, I started working with a sports psychologist when I was about 23 or 24. And I only worked with her for about a year, but we started to work on some really interesting concepts. And one of them was that she asked me what my mindset was when I approached each different apparatus. She was like, what kind of frame of mind do you want to be in? And I said, well, when I'm doing floor and I'm doing vault, I want to be quite aggressive because they're power apparatus. So I can't be calm. I need to be in quite an aggressive frame of mind. She was like, okay, that's interesting. And what about pommel horse, and what about high bar? And I said, well, when I'm doing pommel horse, I want to be nice and calm. I want to be relaxed, because my big problem is when I go to pommel horse, if I'm so nervous, I tighten up like this and I don't swing properly, and I use strength instead of my swing. And my real strength on pommel horse was that I had a real nice swing. I had a real straight shape. So that really hindered my performance when I would tighten up and get nervous. She's like, okay, really interesting. And I used to say the same on high bar as well. I don't want to be too aggressive on high bar, Although you're doing big skills and you've got to do release and catches, I want to be nice and calm. I want to use my technique. Because my big strength on high bar was understanding the swing of the bar and using my technique and my timing. She said, right, well, we're going to work on some breathing techniques. So we worked on these breathing techniques where I would control my breathing so that, and if I remember correctly, if I wanted to be in a mindset where it was quite aggressive, so floor and vault, I would breathe in slowly and breathe out fast. So I'd take 2 seconds to breathe in, fill my lungs right up, and then breathe out fast like that. And then on the opposite, I would breathe in fast and then breathe out slow to calm down. And it worked really well doing that. So I would definitely recommend thinking about the mindset you want to be in to go on pommel horse. And for me, it was always being calm. For somebody else, it might be different. But most of the pommel horse competitors that I've worked with, competed against, finals I've been in, and the greats like Max and Lewis, they're always pretty calm on pommel and they're able to swing and they just focus on one skill at a time. But pommel horse is challenging, man. I'll tell you a story about lockdown. When I was in those lockdowns and I was training at my mum and dad's house and I was on that back decking and I had my mushroom up there, and the last thing I would do in every pommel horse session was 2 sets of circles. I would do 60 circles on the mushroom and then 50 circles on the 2-handle mushroom. And it was almost like a ritual, because I would have to put the foam cover on to do the 60 circles on the mushroom. Then I'd have to take it off. I'd have to get the Allen key. I'd have to wind it up, put the handle back on. And it was the hardest part of those pommel sessions for me to do. And there were times where like I didn't want to do it because it was really hard. Once you're like a grown man, to do like sets of 60 circles or 50 circles on a mushroom is tough, because you've got to keep your feet up in the air and it's really hard on your abs and it's just not very nice and your arms are burning. But what I would do is like I would close my eyes and I'd imagine that all of my best friends, my family and my teammates were basically had formed like a guard of honour from the back double doors of my mum's and dad's house all the way up onto this decking to surround me around the pommel horse, and they were all just there to like cheer me on. And like I had started to develop like this mindset towards the end that all of the people that were there supporting me were just on my team. I didn't care if I fell off or I made a mistake. They were there and they wanted me to do well. And that was really good, and it helped me do that on those really difficult days. I've never told anyone that before. But when I was struggling and it was raining outside and I'd been 20 weeks in lockdown and I was like, why on earth am I doing these pommel horse sessions? Like, nobody's watching me. No one's seeing this. You know, apart from the times that I live streamed it, I was just on my own doing it every single day in the garden, you know, thinking, what on earth am I even doing? But I would close my eyes, I'd visualize all my favorite people in the world saying, come on, you could do it. It'd get me super motivated and ready to go. And then towards the end of my career, yeah, it became that, you know. But my last pommel horse routine that I competed on was at that British Championships of 2021, and I fell off, you know. I did my shear to handstand and, you know, my shoulder had been struggling for a few weeks and I tore my cuff. And I tried to finish the routine. It was a terrible routine. It wasn't a nice routine. And I tightened up and I was stiff. But I mean, I was struggling. I was in a lot of pain with my shoulder. I just tore my cuff whilst I was doing it. So it's just one of them things you've just got to learn. But I think the most important thing with pommels is to make sure that you do loads of numbers, but you also like change the variability of the situation. So you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because when you go up there and you put your hand up to do a pommel horse routine, there is... I can't imagine that anybody ever feels comfortable in that situation, because you're very vulnerable. You're up there. You know how easy it is to make a mistake on a pommel. You know, I used to have this thing when I was younger where I would be doing my pommel horse routine and then I'd realise that I hadn't blinked. I'd be like, oh my God, I need to blink, because my eyes would start watering. And if you try to not blink and then blink, it ends up not being a normal blink. It's like a closed eyes. And I could nearly fall off when I'd blink, and it freaked me out, you know, because pommel horse is such a difficult apparatus. But I think being able to keep calm, taking it one skill at a time, don't get ahead of yourself. One of the biggest, most common mistakes you'll ever see in competitions on pommel horse is people thinking they've got to the end of their routine, and I know the conversation they're having with themselves in their brain, because I've had it so many times. You get to the end and you think, I've done it, and you go to do the dismount and you make a mistake and you fall off on that dismount, because that dismount is really hard. When you've done a whole pommel horse routine, your arms are on fire. If you're slightly off and you take a bit of time, you just have to be... You haven't finished your routine until your feet hit the floor, and that's the most important, I think, on pommel horse. So the routine starts when you touch the pommel and your feet hit the floor after that dismount. So that's the most important thing, and changing up that variability. So one day try 3 pommel horse routines. Try pommel horse routines with no warm-up. Try pommel horse routines in your trousers. Try pommel horse routines when you're cold. Do it without a warm-up. Just change the variability, because when you go to do a competition, it's probably the hardest apparatus to compete on, and most of the time you will have sat down for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and you'll be cold. So making sure that, and really make sure you don't get cold. Because on pommels, if you get cold, you just stiffen up and it feels like your arms are made out of lead. So keep them warm. And that's why you often see like the Japanese gymnasts, Chinese gymnasts, or any of the other gymnasts wearing big, massive coats between apparatus, because they're trying to keep their muscles warm. So that would be my answer to that question. And I think the last question I've got this is actually a question that came out of I went for dinner with three different athletes from David Lloyd. So a karate guy called James, a squash player, and a boxer. And it's all different athletes we've never really met before. Went for dinner and we got to talking about our careers. And the squash player and the boxer, they're still training. Me and James were finished. So we're talking. And one of the questions that came up was, do you guys believe in nature versus nurture? What do you think's, do you think you're born with a gift? And athletes are born, or do you think that they're made or they're created through their environment? And so we got to talking about it, and like I've swayed back and forth, and it's one of the questions that always comes up with like athletes or in athlete circles, like, oh God, are you just born with talent? Like, is there anything you can do, or can you train it? And I think for me, I heard a guy talking recently saying that when he was younger, he thought that basically swimmers look like swimmers because they swim. And then he said, but what happens is swimmers go to swimming because their body lends itself to swimming. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, right? But I think you physically do have gifts, and everybody's born with, a different physical makeup. And for me, I'm like the perfect build for a gymnast, right? I'm small, I'm strong, I'm pretty muscular, I'm lean, I'm pretty powerful. So I was like the perfect fit for a gymnast. And I think, you have those. I was never going to play in the NBA. Doesn't matter what I do or how good I got, I was never going to play in the NBA, right? So, like, you were born with kind of the raw materials physically. And because of that, naturally, people that are below 5'6" are going to naturally lean more towards gymnastics, right? And people that are above 6 foot, 6'5", they're naturally going to go to sports like, I don't know, high jump, pole vault, basketball, volleyball. That's why when you go to the Olympic Games and you walk through an Olympic village, you can go, wow, they're shot putters, they're gymnasts, they're weightlifters, they're the volleyball team. Like, you can see that straight away because the sports attract a certain physical makeup. And like, people have natural ability, right? I've trained with some of the most talented gymnasts in the world, and I've seen them, and they have certain gifts in certain areas that, it's just within them. They were born with them, have a certain talent for a certain thing. And that comes back to the super strengths, and everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. But then I think, can you train that mental ability, that resilience, that work ethic? And I think you can. I think that's heavily influenced by your environment. When I was a kid, I was so self-determined, and I had that within me. But I think it was influenced by the people, my role models, my dad, my granddad, the lessons they taught me. It's a really difficult question to answer, but I think ultimately it's just a mixture of both. And the perfect scenario is when you get an incredibly gifted, physically gifted kid that has the right mentality. That's the dream for any coach, the perfect sportsman. It's really hard to find that. And I'm guessing people like Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, they're the Kohei Uchimura in gymnastics. They're the type of people that have got those physical gifts, but they've also got that mental side, which is incredibly important. And you need both, man. You're not going to do it without the other two. Like, it's really, really important. And you can learn to become resilient. You can learn to be competitive. You can learn to have work ethic. You can learn all of these things for sure, like, definitely. But those physical gifts, they're within you already. And everybody has them, strengths and weaknesses. It's your job to find out what they are. So I guess I've not really answered that question very concisely, and it's because I still don't really know the answer to it. It's one that I always talk about with my friends, especially like a lot of my friends are gymnastics coaches, so they always ask that, and we always talk about that. And a lot coaches will get a kid that's just naturally gifted, and they pick things up like that. Like, in 2 seconds, they'll pick things up, and they'll learn really fast. I think that's a beautiful thing about life, right? Everybody's different, and all athletes are different as well, and different things make them tick. So, it's not really answered that question, but it's one that I still think about all of the time. I don't know the answer to it. Maybe in the future, if I start interviewing more and more athletes, maybe I'll be able to get to that answer in the future. But at the minute, I'm like, I think the reality is it's probably a mixture of both, but you definitely are born with physical gifts that lend yourself towards different things, for sure, because everyone's got different strengths and weaknesses. And like I said, I'd never be able to play in the NBA, but I was suited to gymnastics. So, that's answered those questions. And thank you to everyone that sent the questions in to me. It's been cool to do a bit more of a relaxed episode today. It's been a little bit different. This is episode 21 we're recording today. Sometimes it can be difficult to think of the topics and the ideas for the podcast, but the reason we did that today is because that we've got a lot of guests lined up. So fingers crossed, we've got 4 guests lined up in a row. It's going to be really cool. I'm super excited we've got to this point of the podcast. And I think that, if there was a question to answer at the end, it would probably be, what is the future of the podcast? Back in 2018, I started the podcast. I had this idea to start a podcast. I got Sam on board. We recorded 5 episodes. I loved it, but for whatever reason, we didn't carry it on. The stars didn't align. I was still training. Things happened. I wasn't probably in the right place mentally at that point, and there was still a few hurdles I needed to go through to get to this point at which I'm at now, in which we started in January. We've been keeping this up for 5 months. I wasn't convinced that I was going to be able to do individual episodes for 5 months. Sam was, so it's great that he's got that confidence in me, and we've made it to this point, which is pretty cool. After episode 3 or 4, I was like, how am I going to come up with these ideas for the episode? But, it's turned into something very different. I think it's something quite unique. I really enjoy it. I find it quite therapeutic. I like to be able to get those ideas out there. It's amazing to see the feedback, the support. The podcast is growing. I think it's going to be really cool to see what happens when we start adding guests in and sharing their stories. And I think that's the future of it. We're just going to try and keep it up, keep it going. We both enjoy it. It's a good part of our week. And it's going to be great to start to share other people's stories with you. I'm really excited about that, because that's something that, excites me and inspires me. So stay tuned for the next few episodes. They're going to have guests. I'll be announcing the guests on social media. I'm really excited for them. It's going to be cool. I'll be catching up with some old friends, so that'll be really good. And just thank you for supporting the podcast. Remember to subscribe, especially now as we're going to be adding in the guests. You won't want to miss that. The podcasts get released every Monday. We release clips on Instagram, TikTok. The full episode goes on YouTube every Sunday, and you can watch that so you can see the visuals. And it's on all audio platforms, so Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. So make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, because that makes a big difference. But more than anything, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.